When a film grosses $100 million over the course of 2 weeks in the summer, Hollywood usually takes notice. And when that film was made several years ago, kicked around from studio to studio, nobody wanted to distribute it. Well, it really should catch people's attention, is it? Of course, I'm talking about Sound of Freedom, which has gone beyond just being a film for some people. It's a cause. Joining us now to discuss this phenomenon, Christian Toto. He's the host of the Hollywood in Toto podcast and the proprietor of HollywoodInToto.com. Hey, Christian, thanks for joining us.
Sure, my pleasure.
Well, first of all, I read your review. This is a significant film, in your opinion.
It's a very good film. You know, I often think that movies like this that have an important message are a little bit like eating your vegetables. Like, you know, you have to watch it. You should watch it. You need to learn from it. But maybe it's not engaging. Maybe it's not entertaining. But this one is. So it does those two things quite well. It is showing us that the child sex trafficking is real. It's a real problem. It's something we don't talk about enough, but it also does it in a very compelling way. And part of that is for Jim Caviezel's front and center. He's a very good actor. He anchors the material, but it's a well-produced movie. It's not a huge budget, but it looks good. The cinematography is first rate. So for all those reasons, it's really getting people's attention in more ways than one, as we'll probably talk about in a second.
Well, and it's based on a true story. And like I said, I mean, Disney actually was involved in this at one point. Major studios were involved in the creation of the film at various iterations. So it's not like it was this fringe thing that it's being painted as now.
No, you know, a lot of the media narratives around the movie are just false. I mean, they're calling it QAnon adjacent. It's all nonsense. And in part, you can prove it because the movie was made and done 5 years ago.
Right.
Plus, you know, whenever a movie's made, it doesn't happen overnight. So it could be 6, 7, 8 years ago where the whole conception came around. So were we talking about QAnon back then? Of course not. So that's a silly argument. It's something to attack the film by. It doesn't make sense, and I think the film stands on its own.
So to take the logic of, you know, Hollywood is one thing, but then you've got people in the media, you've got Hollywood film critics who were just either ignoring the film, which I think is even more insulting than watching the film and then writing lies about it. But by their logic, Christian, it seems to go like this. The movie is about sex trafficking of children. And QAnon focuses quite a bit of their attention, whatever the hell QAnon is, on the sex trafficking of children. And also QAnon is very supportive of President Trump. Therefore, if you are against the sex trafficking of children, you're for Trump, we're against Trump. So, I mean, that leads me to think, if you fill in the blanks, that they're okay with sex trafficking of children.
It's an amazing string of logic which you just uncoupled, which is very embarrassing for the press. Now, I don't think the press is pro-child sex trafficking.
By the way, I'm not making that case. I'm just following their logic.
Exactly. But I also think that the press is so biased and so eager to tell a certain narrative that when a movie comes along that appears to lean to the right, that appears to be faith-based, even though it really isn't. It's the word God is mentioned 2 or 3 times, and that's it. This is not a faith-based movie. But even it has that look about it, that feel, that sense.
Yeah.
They've got to attack it. And they use this very lazy, very poorly thought out argument against it, the QAnon. Again, like you, I don't even know what QAnon is. I don't think about it. I don't talk about it. No one I know is QAnon adjacent. Right. So I'm sure they're out there. I'm sure they have their theories. I'm not going to dismiss it as a fantasy, but bringing it into this movie doesn't make sense. And it's just showing you how eager they are to attack it, which again is odd because even if it's a terrible movie, it is talking about a really important subject that we're all talking about now. Isn't that good?
Yeah, you would think. You would think. And we're also talking about, as I mentioned, $100 million. I think they're just under $100 million after 2 weekends. As you mentioned, it's not a huge budget film. And it was distributed and promoted in a very unorthodox way from the geniuses. I think they are geniuses over at Angel Studio. I said this catches people's attention. Does it catch the attention of anyone in Hollywood, of people who are interested in making profit? They'd still care about that, don't they?
On paper, yes. I don't think it's caught their attention in that way, in the right way, in the way it should be catching their attention. I mean, look at, you know, Top Gun Maverick came out last year. Now, you can't make a movie overnight, but have we heard any announcements of any Top Gun Maverick style movies, patriotic, heroic, in that mold? Because usually when a movie is a hit, you think, okay, sequel, prequel, you know, spin-off, reimagining. Let's get everything we can together to make a movie like that because that movie was such a big hit. But we're not seeing that with Top Gun Maverick. I don't think you'll see that here. Hollywood, you know, what's so problematic about Hollywood right now is they're not listening to the public. If an indie film comes out of nowhere from this little studio that's made all of 2 movies so far and is a smash sensation, everyone in Hollywood should be taking notes,
Right. Yeah.
competing. What did
God
they
knows
get?
they know how to be derivative, Christian. Do I need to see another Spider-Man movie? Come on.
I mean, copycats are the coin of the realm. It's what they do best. They imitate and imitate it, until they're blue in the face, and yet you don't sense that's happening. And if you read the press, why would they want to imitate this QAnon adjacent lark?
Right.
Well,
Exactly.
I think that's what they're thinking about right now, as opposed to this is a movie about heroism, about danger, about a real life subject that people care about, and those are the things you should try to emulate and duplicate, hopefully in a good way, in a strong way, in a powerful way.
Yeah.
But I don't get the sense that's happening. Maybe it is behind the scenes. We'll have to wait and see.
Speaking of being derivative, and speaking of indie films, although I guess in this case it's an Indiana film, the fifth iteration of Indiana Jones, and it certainly has grossed more in 3 weeks than Sound of Freedom has, but it's still seen as a major disappointment. Am I right? Because I'm shocked at how little, frankly, it's made considering the name, star power, and the legacy of the Indiana Jones franchise.
Yeah, I mean, you have an older star. It's hard to get around the fact that Harrison Ford was in his late 70s when he shot the film. You've got a franchise where the last one was a clunker and people haven't forgotten that. You've got a trailer or two that were just terrible with bad CGI that didn't impress anyone. And then you had, some of the messaging in the film. You've had this female hero who was flawless, who was basically rescuing Indy at some point. And it's not a great film. It's perfectly fine. It's average. If you go to the theater, you suck up the air conditioning, you'll have a decent time. It's not a bad film.
Wow.
But for all those reasons, it's underperforming. You've got to, with an indie film, you've got to make a lot of money. And the fact that the budget was so high and the results are so low, this is a huge bomb for Disney. There's no way around it.
Harrison Ford is the same age as Joe Biden, and you can't tell me that Jeffrey Katzenberg and the whole folks in Hollywood were thinking, let's just show Harrison Ford doing great things, and it'll make people think Joe Biden can do the same thing. I'm that conspiracy oriented on this. Speaking of being derivative, the writers are still on strike, and now the actors, Screen Actors Guild, have joined them. I mean, this is a major problem for Hollywood right now, isn't it?
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. And, George Clooney said it's an inflection point for Hollywood. He's right. And I don't know how this will shake out. Obviously Hollywood's worried about AI. It's worried about streaming residuals. But the whole industry, between the Biden economy and the fact that the streaming revolution is falling because all these streamers are not making money, and they're looking at the income and the ROI. It's just not there.
Yeah.
So even before the strike was going on, the double strikes, the industry was in trouble. And you've seen some of the belt tightening within the industry. Netflix, HBO Max, all these different companies, canceling shows, erasing shows, firing their DEI executives one by one. So things were already in flux before the strikes happened. But this could be catastrophic. You're talking about maybe a long period because neither of these sides seems willing to talk. You're talking about the writer strike's already been going on since May 2nd. You've had no late night TV. You're not going to have any Saturday Night Live in a few weeks. And then there's going to be this whole gap where there's nothing to put out there. We're not there yet, of course. They've got a lot of stuff in the pipeline, but that's going to be a problem as well. You're going to lose money. You're going to lose audience. And who knows how this all shakes out. I mean, there's a lot of ego, there's a lot of greed, and there's a lot of problems. And all those things are not boding well for Hollywood.
Yeah, can I ask you, just in our final minute here, this new Disney version of Snow White, the live-action version that everyone's talking about. Snow White is Latina, and the dwarves aren't dwarves, and they're all made. You know me, I have an entertainment background. I'm okay with non-traditional casting. I saw an all-black version of Two Gentlemen of Verona that was fantastic, and I think that it brings something new to the table. Is there something wrong with me that I'm not as worked up about this casting as everybody else seems to be?
Well, it certainly on the surface seems a bit comical, the fact that you've taken dwarves and you've made them traditional height people. And just, it's also the context. If it was any other company, it's like, okay, maybe they're trying something new and bold and daring. Like you said, I think a lot of these sort of creative choices can be wonderful. But when it's Disney, when you know how woke Disney is,
right,
you get suspicious. You think, oh, gosh. And also, a lot of times when there's this push for uber diversity, while on paper it's perfectly fine, like you said, it can be creatively wonderful, there's a sense that that's the focus. that the storytelling, the acting, all the
Right.
other things.
Instead of actually being creative in filmmaking, there's like the creativity ends at the casting, and that's it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, no one's complaining about Hamilton. It's one of the
I was
most
just going to say, I love the fact that I've got an African-American George Washington and Thomas Jefferson in Hamilton, and it actually adds to the storytelling, I think. All right, we'll leave it there. Christian Toto, great takes as always. Thanks for joining us. He's the host of the Hollywood and Toto podcast. More to come on O'Connor Tonight.